Okay, today we're beginning 12 steps to spiritual recovery. Step one is the God perspective. If you would like to read ahead on any of these, I did post all 12 steps on our revised website, independentunity.org. So be sure to visit that and see what you think of it. But it's in one of the menus on top of the site. But I thought I would pattern this concept after the 12 steps that have to do with recovery and substance abuse and so on, but they don't really match in the same way. I went through and took each of the steps and looked at it and to see how that would apply to our spiritual understanding and spiritual transformation, spiritual recovery. So the way I'm looking at this is these are 12 ideas that if you will just familiarize yourself with them and just kind of think about them, remember them throughout the week, throughout the day, I think it's a very helpful grasp on what we teach here. And I think it's kind of a condensed version of that and taken in small bites. And I find things like that helpful. But the God perspective, the step one, is I accept that God as Spirit is the one presence and one power of good now active in my life. This step is very important. It's probably one of the most important. And the way I look at these ideas is like a funnel that's turned upside down. These are like the point, and there's a whole set of ideas that go beneath that. So it's a place to begin thinking. And if you're going through a challenge in your life right now, you accept that God as Spirit is the one presence and one power of good now active in your life. And the idea here is to really embrace that. So what do you do when it looks like your life is falling apart? This reminds you that there's something better unfolding, something greater than what you're seeing at the moment. And this is, it's one of the most important steps probably of all. And we just kind of we'll carry this all through the complete 12 steps. So we start with the understanding that our process of spiritual recovery is one of reclaiming ownership of a vital relationship that we already have. In this case, we're talking about recovering our conscious unity with God. That is losing that awareness of the presence of God is one of the greatest challenges that we have. It's easiest to do because there's so many things that get our attention, pull our attention away from this higher truth. And what we are doing is recovering the awareness of our relationship of oneness. We're not affirming or creating oneness with God. It's like, I think it was James Freeman used to say that we don't affirm something to make it true, we affirm it because it is true. We are already one with God, and our process of spiritual recovery is the simple realization of this truth, that this is true. There's nothing I am going to do or need to do to make myself more one with God. Am I conscious of that? Not always. In fact, I lose that frequently. And so that's what we're trying to do with steps like this or ideas like this, is to bring that awareness back. We're not getting something that we are not in possession of. We're already in possession of our unity with God. And we're just reminding ourselves of this. We think of the woman in Jesus' parable who had 10 coins but lost one. She swept her house clean until she found it. We can think of these 12 steps of spiritual recovery as sweeping our own house a sincere reexamination of our spiritual belief system, a regaining of our conscious union with God. There are so many examples in the teachings of Jesus that when you look at them from the perspective we're talking about now, they make perfect sense. Like, why would he talk about this woman that, had 10 coins and lost one, and then spent the next couple of days or whatever cleaning her house just to find that? What's that mean? Unless it means she lost something and rediscovered something that she already owned. That whole idea is ownership. It's recovering something you own already. She didn't go out and make another coin, do something to produce more income. She was simply recovering what she already owned. And it's a very important concept. That's why I'm so adamant about saying there's no such thing as soul evolution. We're not evolving the soul, we are recovering the soul. We are remembering what we are at the deepest level. If we were created in the image and after the likeness of God, if we accept that as a truth, then what would that mean? Did God create a partial, or if we're a partial being, if we're an unevolved soul, is that the image and likeness of God? Is God also unevolved? Is God also in the process of evolving, of becoming something more than God was yesterday or today? Or is there an evolution process occurring? There's obviously an evolution occurring on the physical level, in our consciousness, in our thoughts. We're actually evolving to something, but what does that mean? Evolution is really a process of adaptation. We're adapting our consciousness to what is true at the spiritual level. And what is true is I am a complete soul now. I am now one with God. God is now fully functioning, fully at work in my life at this very moment. That is true. And so my work is to adapt my consciousness that's saying, no, God's not here. If God was here, why would we be suffering? Why would there be problems in the world? People ask that question all the time. If God is so good, how come there's suffering? How come people are hurting? How come there's starvation? How come there's this and that? And they could not possibly conceive of God as a presence here and now, but that presence has been forgotten. It's being blocked in the individual consciousness. And so when that happens, it's like holding up your hand in front of a flashlight. You'll see a shadow. And that shadow is the problem. That shadow is the limitation. And we're saying that's something real, and it's being cast by our own forgetfulness. It's being cast by our own misunderstanding. That light is always shining. So it's a very important idea to get back to, because usually when we are hurting, when we lack something, we're asking God to give us something we don't have. Give us something more. Give us an answer we don't have. What we want to do is assume that answer is now present, that the fullness of God is now present. It's absolute good, and it's working for my greater good, working to unfold greater good through me at this moment. So I want to recover that idea. I want to get back to that truth so I can regain my peace. Because when you know that is actually true, you begin to relax. You begin to regain the peace that at a soul level you've never lost. All of the things we seek to establish in ourselves are present all the time. That is, all the good conditions, the good states that we want to establish in ourselves are always present. But we are not always making the choice to experience those things. we're often making choices to fear, to be angry, to react to world conditions in ways that take us down into a level that is not for the best and highest of our good. And it's not a matter of sticking our heads in the sand either. You think of yourself as that woman. If I'm not at peace now, I've lost a coin. But I have the coin of peace. I have that coin all the time. I just lost it. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out how to get it back. I was listening to another near-death story this week. It was a man who was in a horrible automobile accident. His skull was actually severed or separated from his spinal cord. The doctors told him that if he didn't have certain surgery, he would die. There was no doubt about it. And if he lived, even with the surgery, he would be paralyzed all of his life. And he said something told him that was not true. That was not the case. But in the meantime, he started experiencing very severe pain, so he was being injected with, or given a painkiller, a very strong painkiller, every hour. He was moved into intensive care. He was moved from one very intensive care unit. I can't remember what it was. It was people were watching through a window, he said, waiting for him to die so they could get his organs. He was an organ donor. And they wanted to get him the moment that he made the transition. Well, he didn't do it. They were all pretty angry at him. But anyway, he was transferred into intensive care, and he asked the nurse to give him the drug. And she said, no, that's not possible. She said, what's your pain level from 1 to 10? He said, 10. She said, that's not possible. And she stomped out of the room. He said he became so angry. Prior to that, he was able to actually leave his body and leave the pain, leave, the horrific state that he was in. But he was so angry at that nurse for doing that he couldn't leave his body. He couldn't step out again. Because he said when he stepped out, it was a beautiful experience. And he had to let her go. He said, as long as I was holding on to her, I was angry at her. I couldn't go to that higher state. And so he had to completely forgive her. And he did. He was able to do that and get back into that state. Well, to make a long story short, he recovered and has about 95% of the use of his body. He plays golf and all of that. He went back to the surgeon that said he absolutely must have surgery. He'd never walk again, and he would die. The surgeon didn't believe him. He pulled the back of his shirt open to see where he had been operated on. He had no surgery. He just had a healing. But the point of this is the man was saying that as long as he was angry, he fell down into this lower state. He couldn't deal with his present situation, which was very severe. He forgot. He had a coin that he lost. And so he remembered that, and he swept his house clean and got it. There's all kinds of ways this principle comes to us. But it is important to remember always. Not easy to do, but it's important to come back, which is why we set up things like steps. Here's what we do. Here's how we get back. Here's what I'm to remember. And we bring ourselves back to this idea that the greater good that God is now working through me. I do have that 10th coin. And I become still enough to find it, to reconnect with it. Though Jesus often used masculine pronouns when he was referring to God, he gave his best direct definition to Nicodemus. God is spirit. He went on to explain that spirit is like the wind we cannot see, but whose effects in the swaying branches of a tree make it apparent. This is probably one of the best definitions of God that we find in the Bible. God is spirit. Not God is a spirit. I think it was King James. The King James Version says God is a spirit. Could be like a spiritual being someplace up in the sky or whatever. But that was corrected by just saying God is spirit. And what do you think of when you think of spirit? You know, we think of energy. We don't think of a being. We don't think of a man. We think of being. We think of energy. And that's a very important thing to grasp. And I don't know how we got so much into God as a man. I mean, it's stated throughout the Bible. And we have all kinds of paintings of God. You know, if you do a Google search on images of God, you'll find all kinds of old men with beards and long white hair and surrounded by clouds of angels, you know, singing and blowing trumpets and whatever. That's the image most of us grew up with. But Jesus is saying God is energy. And those who worship him must worship from an energy perspective. That is, don't think of God as the old man, as a human being. Think of God as energy, like the wind that blows. We see the effects of it, but we don't see it. And I just think that's one of the best definitions, as close to a definition as we can get. God is spirit. And so we're not thinking about, when we talk about God is, or a power greater than myself, we're talking about spirit. And what's the myself? The myself is the ego. It's the human side of us, that part we've defined and the world has helped us define, the one that's having the problem. To say there is a power greater than myself at work doesn't mean it's a power separate from myself. That's what we have to break that thought. The power greater than myself really is myself. From a spiritual perspective, it's the soul. There's no place where God leaves off and my soul begins. So my soul is the portal to the infinite. So the power greater than myself is not something far off. It's active right now. And that's a huge transition that we make in our thinking when we are undergoing some type of a stressful situation, because we feel that I don't have the power to deal with this. And it's true that on the ego level, on the personality level, we don't. We're very limited. We are defined by our body, by our history, culture, gender, all of that stuff. We define ourselves from a very limited perspective, and it's not too hard to reach the end of our limitations. That's why religion, in a formal sense, was born. It was born out of the belief that we are limited human beings. So what we want to do is erase that wall, erase that understanding that the power greater than ourself is more of ourself. We're connected all the time to this one presence and one power. God is spirit, and so am I. I'm a spiritual being expressing through a physical body. So that spiritual part of me is made of the same stuff. When we say God is spirit, I am spirit, you are spirit. We are all expressions of this one presence and one power. So it's an awakening, it's a reclaiming, a recovery of our true source and our true being. A very important transition to make. It's a big transition. And it's not easy to remember that always, which is why it's good to have short statements that help remind us. And the imagery of the woman sweeping the house clean. A lot of times we just settle for the fact that, well, I've got 9 here, that'll do me. I don't know what happened to the 10th one, but I'll get along without it, more or less. And we really don't get along without it. You never forget. You know, if you lose a coin, you don't forget it. If you lose your connection with God, conscious connection with God, you don't forget it. You remember through dissatisfaction, you remember through fear, you remember through anger, you remember through all kinds of things that life is happening in a way that I'm too small to deal with. That's a reminder that you're not being all that you can be at that moment. Power greater than yourself, you've got to open yourself up. And you do that through the recognition that God is spirit expressing through and as me now. No place where God leaves off and I begin. When we think of spirit, we do not think of a being. We think of being, the omnipresence of the creative life force. Paul pointed out that it is within this spirit that we live and move and have our being. God as spirit is the infinite ocean of life, love, power, and intelligence that is in all and through all. Like a sponge immersed in water, we are each immersed in God, and God is immersed in us. And I've always liked that statement, Paul's, that in God we live and move and have our being. Does that sound like an old man in the sky? It sounds like energy. It sounds like a creative life force. It sounds like an energy field in which we live and move and have our being. Not something far off, something with us now, like the sponge immersed in the water. I love that illustration. There's water flowing all around the sponge and the water flowing through the sponge, and there's no place where the whole of the water leaves off and the water in the sponge begins. And that's how we are. But we're conscious. We are points of consciousness. And that's what makes it different, because we've used the imagination, we've used our point of consciousness as an identity separate from our God, separate from our Creator. And just our vocabulary. I'm talking about God, and just to mention that word God, it makes us think of something separate from ourselves. And to even say I'm an expression of God, well, that still causes my mind to say there's God and then I'm that in expression. It's almost like two things. But there's no other way to talk about it than to use words, to use vocabulary. So it's up to each of us to make that transition in our own thinking. So you're involved in something that you don't quite understand. You're feeling like the world's against you. You're swimming up the stream backwards or whatever. And that you forget that you are now immersed in the full power of God at this very moment. Jesus explained this relationship of oneness very clearly. The kingdom of God is within you. Our point of contact with God is within our own being. Though we may have falsely believed that we are separate from God, this never has been nor never can be true. And again, I've said, we have a paradigm of oneness and a paradigm of separation. I think all of mainstream religion is based on a paradigm of separation, the belief that we are separate from God. And the point of the religion is to bring us back, or to bring us into oneness with God. And the point of basically mainstream Christianity is to make that contact when we die, once we're dead. We leave this body and we go to heaven. That's the hope. So as somebody has said, mainstream Christianity is religion to die by, whereas the teachings of unity are religion to live by. If you think about that, a lot of people are waiting for death. There was a program I was watching where they were actually interviewing people on the street. What do you think happens when you die? And almost all of them said, well, we go to heaven or hell. And that is not true. It's not true. I've come to believe that because I think that there are people that have stepped through that veil that know that's not true. That is a teaching of the church, and I can see the advantage of teaching that. If somebody says, come to church or you're going to go to hell, and you believe that, aren't you likely going to show up at church? You may sleep through the whole thing, but you put in your appearance, and so when you die, you'll go to heaven. Or whatever conditions are attached to that. So what if we drop that whole thing and say that's not the point at all? That my paradigm is a paradigm of oneness. I'm one with God now. I am in the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is in me. How can we get that wrong? How can we, I quote that all the time, that statement from Jesus all the time, because the rest of mainstream Christianity seems to have forgotten it. And they need the reminder, so I keep reminding everybody. But what does it mean? It means it's within your reach. It's you in expression. It's God is active in all of us at this very moment. Not something that will happen sometime in the future. You don't have to worry about being good, so you will be safe and free, saved. We're already saved. We're already okay. The struggle and the hell is what we create ourselves. And we've probably all been there. We don't need a Satan and a hell because we're pretty good at making one ourselves. We can really make ourselves suffer. And religion can help us sometimes. The story is told of a young student asking his teacher Socrates how to find wisdom. Socrates grabbed the youth by the back of the neck. He held his head under some water. The student flailed violently, trying to escape. When Socrates lifted him from the water, he said, "What did you want more than anything?" The student replied, "Air." Socrates said, "When you want wisdom as much as you wanted air, you'll find it." And that's really true. When I discovered this way of life, this teaching, I was very excited by it. No one had to tell me, read the next book about it or read the book that you have about it, study that. I did it because I wanted to. And that was my air. I wanted it more than anything in the world. I wanted more. I couldn't get enough of it. And that's the kind of mindset. And it's easy to go along over the years and forget that. But then I get re-inspired, get back to that original idea. And what was also interesting about it is that nobody could argue me out of it. It wasn't that I was bullheaded about it. But when you hear something you know is true, it resonates with your soul at such a level that no one could argue otherwise. Okay. Though the woman in the parable momentarily lost sight of her 10th coin, she knew it was hers and made it her complete mission to recover it. So it is with us. We practice reminding ourselves daily that God is Spirit, is the one presence and one power of good now active in our life. We make a habit of affirming the truth of this statement in all that we do. And here's the statement: I accept that God is Spirit, is the one presence and one power of good now active in my life. Let's say that together. I accept that God as Spirit is the one presence and one power of good now active in my life. And that is absolutely true. Okay, next week we'll jump into step 2. Thanks for coming out, and look forward to seeing you downstairs at the anniversary dinner.
So oftentimes we're looking somewhere over there, searching for an answer any place but here. And we forget to notice the miracle we are, that with each breath and heartbeat our lives are happening now. And in this now moment, the world is filled with peace. In this now moment, I feel such sweet release. I'm not looking to the future or hung up in the past. In this now moment, I am free. I'm free at last. The golden sun is shining, the breeze is blowing by. We pause in joy and wonder, we don't need a reason why. The sky is blue, the clouds are white, the rain falls from above. And every breath and heartbeat is a miracle of love. And in this now moment, the world is filled with peace. In this now moment, I feel such sweet release. I'm not looking to the future or hung up in the past. In this now moment, I am free. I'm free at last. Have you stopped to consider the lilies of the field? They neither toil nor spin, yet their beauty is revealed. And even Solomon the king was not arrayed like this. And with each breath and heartbeat, the universe is bliss. And in this now moment, the world is filled with peace. In this now moment, I feel such sweet release. I'm not looking to the future or hung up in the past. In this now moment, I am free. I'm free at last. Doesn't matter where I'm going, doesn't matter where I've been. In this now moment, my life begins again.
You've been watching a talk given by Reverend Doug Bottorff here at Independent Unity in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us spread our message. If you would like to support us, you can do so by clicking the button in the right-hand corner of the video screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching.